Hello, everybody, and welcome to the October 23rd, 2018 edition of the Ephrom Josine Show. I am your host, Ephrom Josine. Anyway, Market Watch came out with a report recently comparing the growth of the top 1% over the first year of the Trump administration versus the growth of the people the wealth will trickle down to. Here is what they have found. The average wage of the top 1% of income earners hit $719,000 per year in 2017. Now, I should point out that when people are talking about, say, millionaires or billionaires, those aren't actually 1%. Those are an even smaller percentage who run politics, who run everything. However, we still shouldn't ignore the fact that that's still kind of an absurd amount, in my opinion. And don't get me wrong, I think that is, depending on the scenario, just enough where you could maybe consider it reasonable. But that's not like the highest. The highest earners are well within the millions. Up 3.7 on the year, exceeding their peak of 716,000 per year just before the Great Recession. So they're making more than they were just before the Great Recession. That needs to be pointed out because one of the main things that causes these, it caused the savings and loans crash. It caused, what else? The Great Recession. It also helped cause the Great Depression. Was more or less when a small group of people have that much wealth. They don't actually end up spreading it around. They end up keeping most of it for themselves and buying a yacht, for instance. Now, that does stimulate the economy, kind of, but not in the same way it would if someone was using it to buy, say, food. And when you have this record income inequality, which we are seeing right now, and it is clearly not a stable economy, although I'm not an economist, maybe the best solution is just give two people all the world's wealth and have them make sure it trickles down. Or heck, I'm also a progressive. Let's make sure one of them is a woman. According to a report released Thursday by the Economic Policy Institute, a progressive nonprofit think tank, citing data from Social Security Administration, the average wage of the top 0.1% reached $2.7 million in 2017, the second highest level ever, just 4% below their level in 2007. So they haven't reached the level of the Great Recession yet. It's actually very funny, by the way, because today was the day I also started reading, a little bit behind the Ephrom Josine scenes. Today is also the day I started reading Crash of 2016 by Tom Hartman. It's a really good book. I'd recommend it. It's actually very similar to The Man Who Sold the World, if you ever read that, which was on the Reagan administration. It attacks a lot of the same people. But here is what we know, is that there is an economic collapse coming, and this right here is why. Because when things like this happen, when there is so much money that isn't going back into the system, then the economy isn't being stimulated. It's really just that simple. Economies need to be stimulated, and the best way to stimulate that is through spending in the economy. Income inequality has soared in the U.S. over the last 5 decades. Despite increased worker productivity, the report said, quote, incomes for most Americans have been stagnant for 4 decades. And surprisingly, it was about 4 decades ago America elected Ronald Reagan as president. According to a separate report released earlier this year by the staff of Keith Ellison, quote, instead, this increase in income inequality was almost entirely driven by soaring compensation levels for the 1% of income earners. That's just exactly what you'd expect, honestly. But yeah, this is disturbing. We're on the verge of an economic collapse. Kyle Kalinski's been saying it for years. The economy is a house of cards. We're about to go through another Great Depression. I know I'm going to sound Very, let me think, very prophetical, very hyperbolic when I say that, but we are on the verge of another Great Depression. 80 years since the last one, which was 80 years since the Panic of 1856, which was 80 years after the worst point in economic history in the U.S. around the 1770s, the very early 1770s. We are on the verge of another Great Depression. It's probably going to be followed by another war. And it's all because we didn't learn the lessons of the past and we didn't re-secure the economy after the last Great Recession. The economy has been held together really since, I'd say, maybe the first George Bush administration with just tape and gum. Anyway, so we have to go back to coverage of Politicon, and I know you probably thought the only interesting thing that happened involved Ann Coulter. You'd be wrong. Because if you saw any clip from Politicon, you know what clip you saw. Now, I unfortunately cannot show you the clip. I can, however, narrate it for you. Ladies and gentlemen, Charlie Kirk.
Larger. The point is larger than that, Charlie. I live like a capitalist every single day, Jake. I live as a capitalist.
He is now getting up. He then nearly started a fist fight with Young Turks host Cenk Uygur during his debate with Hassan Piker, which was, of course, a rematch after last year's. Now, this is something that Charlie Kirk did not mention on Twitter, because why would you, even though you do live like a capitalist every single day? I don't know how you live not like a capitalist, for the record. When we live under capitalism. But I'm just a small-brained liberal, so who knows? He lives like a capitalist every single day. Now, I watched that debate, and that was near the end, and you could tell Charlie Kirk was getting increasingly mad during that debate. With millions upon millions of talking points Hassan just couldn't respond to. For instance, when talking about single payer, Charlie made the perfectly reasonable point, well, what about the Cuban healthcare system? Cuba's healthcare system is pretty bad, and you know what? You're right, it's a third world nation, it's very poor, so of course it's not going to be very good. But yeah, maybe single payer isn't working out there. I mean, Charlie even said there was a 15-year difference between the lives of the average American and Cuban. The average American lives 15 years longer than the average Cuban. Now, that I found very odd, because what actually happens is Cuba lives on an average of 79.1 years, while the average American lives an average of 79.3 years, which is a difference of about 2 months. I couldn't even tell where he got that statistic. I swear to God. I looked everywhere. I honestly think he just made it up. But okay, you know what? Maybe I'm being unfair. After all, people have been dying in the US for much longer than they've been dying in Cuba, I think. So we need to take their average in just 1 year. 2016, for instance. In 2016, the life expectancy of the average American was 78.69 years. The life expectancy of the average Cuban was 79.74 years, which is about a year advantage in the Cuban direction. So, to review, a third world communist country that has been under constant sanctions and embargoes by the richest nation in the world for 60 years almost, implements single-payer healthcare and gets results that are just as good, or if not better, than the richest nation in the world. And Charlie Kirk is still against single-payer healthcare on that basis? What was your original argument? Listen, you know that fountain of youth thing? That was the original socialized medicine. What? And this is to not say the Cuban system is perfect or even good. However, they do certainly have quite a few advantages in their direction. Most notably, they are the #1 country currently in HIV research and have actually managed to develop a vaccine for lung cancer. To be fair, Castro was probably a little biased in that. Hey, the man loved his cigars, what can I say? Claims to be a true communist. Did not give all of his other organs cancer. Ugh, what a hypocrite. That was awful, I apologize. But what can you even say when your attacks on Cuba aren't even good? However, there is one thing we know for sure about Charlie Kirk.
Larger. The point is larger than that, Charlie. I live like a capitalist every single day, Jake. I live as a capitalist. Okay? I live what I believe.
I'm never gonna get over that clip. Charlie Kirk, you do in fact live like a capitalist every single day. Now, mind you, you could theoretically get higher quality healthcare if you lived as a communist in a poorer nation that's been under constant embargoes and you somehow don't see a problem with that. But what do I know? I'm Ephrom, and good night.